Before concluding this interview, and referring to the beginning of our conversation, almost 20 years ago, your book Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life was a best-selling self-help book. And now your new book, Liberated Mind, has wide acclaim. How the dance of psychological flexibility changed over time, and what can we expect from the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's changing, and it's changing fast right in front of me, and in ways that make me go like, "Oh, that's great," and also, "Oh my God." Uh, these core processes that we talked about, these 6 questions, that in the traditional ACT model we talk about easily as acceptance and diffusion and selfless concept, present moment awareness, and values and committed action. They are in dimensions. Each of those has a dimension, of affect, cognition, sense of self, attention, overt behavior, and motivation. And when you start thinking about these things as processes of change, as we have in what I've been spending my last 10 years on with process-based therapy, and trying to essentially go meta and look at processes of change, which has always been the focus in ACT, but now an idiographic focus across those psychological levels, but also including the sociocultural level and the biophysiological level. When we start looking at them in the way that you might if you took a multidimensional, multi-level evolutionary approach, which has also been part of the behavioral tradition. It was Skinner's dying words, the importance of variation and selection. And I spent a lot of time trying to build those bridges. Why? Because it's the queen of the theories of the life sciences in every area except behavioral science. And it's time. It's time for us to wash away the stain of eugenics, the horrible things that have been done in evolution's name by limited creatures called human beings. Evolutionary theory needs to take some responsibility for that, but it needs to clean that mess up. And frankly, applied psychology can do more, because we can more quickly show, I think, that these principles are helpful, not in some sort of horrifying racial hygiene effort of the Third Reich, but in the very practical process of how we create a more flexible and successful human being, couple, family, neighborhood, world. When you do that, you start realizing that really what's important is healthy variation, where you can select the winners and let go of the losers and retain the winners in a way that fits the opportunities of the particular contextual moment. In other words, that we're evolving on purpose. And that's what psychological flexibility is about. The special repertoire narrowing impact of difficult thoughts, feelings, memories, and bodily sensations are loosened up by the psychological flexibility model. The special focus on what is the contextual opportunity to do that, to see that consciously, is afforded by flexible, fluid, and voluntary attention to the present moment, because that's where we live, from this more witnessing and noticing sense of self. And being able to select based on values for us to say, not just survival and things of that kind, but also, what do I want to put into my life's moments? What are the qualities of being and doing that I hold dear? And how can I create habits? Retention. That's how retention happens in your lifetime, is repetition and larger patterns. So this flexibility model talks about healthy variation in context that's selected and retained. And each of those dimensions also have healthy variation selected and retained in context as we learn how to deal with affect, cognition, sense of self, motivation, attention, overt behavior. So now here's the thing that happens, though, with psychological flexibility once you think about it that way. Number one, it goes from just an ACT model to a model of human function. Now, we also kind of claimed that, but now we're really beginning to see that. We've just completed a recent evaluation of every mediational study ever done in the history of the world with a randomized trial for a psychological intervention of any kind that had mental health outcomes compared to treatment as usual or no treatment. You want that because comparisons between two active treatments, since mediation looks at the difference, can fuzz the picture if the two active treatments both work in the same way. Really important processes as to how they work will be invisible. So you really want to compare it to no treatment or treatment as usual. And when you do that, which we did, we spent 3 years doing it and looked at 55,000 studies and eventually found 73 measures that had been replicated in 281 findings that were properly done. And here's what I can tell you. It's coming out, and well, it's out now in Behavior Research and Therapy. You can put the link and maybe in the material around this tape so people can find it. But just, I'm first author, Behavior Research and Therapy should get you to it. Well, what we found is that shockingly, psychological flexibility and mindfulness as processes, and psychological flexibility includes mindfulness if you know the work. Almost half of all the mediators that have ever been discovered in the history of the world for psychological interventions for mental health outcomes are those two things. If you then start adding the other ones, anxiety sensitivity, an older concept, the CBT folks had it, more traditional CBT. Yeah, but anxiety sensitivity is very close to, don't judge and run from anxiety. It's very close to the acceptance message that's inside psychological flexibility. Self-compassion, for goodness sakes, it correlates 0.75 with measures of psychological flexibility. Of course, it's a kind of form of self-acceptance and kindness towards yourself. And instead of saying self-acceptance, if I'd said self-kindness or self-compassion, who would have said, no, that you're talking about something different? And on it goes. Well, then there's a few common mediators that are not in that list. Well, there's things like the Therapeutic Alliance. Yeah, but the Therapeutic Alliance, earlier in this video, I said, who are the people who lifted you up? Did you feel accepted, non-judged, etc.? When you look at those processes in the therapeutic relationship and you measure changes in the client that come from the Therapeutic Alliance, it eliminates the impact of the Therapeutic Alliance. Not because it's not important, but because that's the means through which it's important. A good alliance has those qualities, and you are modeling for your client how to be more accepting, how to be less judgmental, how to be in the present, values focused, and so on. The relationship models it. And any therapist that I know of who cares about the alliance says you have to internalize it for it to matter. If it's just in the consulting room and when you leave, it doesn't follow you home, it's not going to change your life. And so that belongs in the psychological flexibility model, I believe. I think the data show that psychological flexibility is modeled by the kinds of therapeutic alliances that make a difference as a mediator. Cognitive reappraisal. Sounds pretty different than ACT. Yeah, but when you really look at it, cognitive reappraisal ends up being more a matter of cognitive flexibility. Yes, the original authors thought it really meant, don't think that, think this. Turns out that's not how it works. It's really more like, don't just focus on that thought. There's other thoughts that are possible here. They may be more helpful to you. Could we attend to them? And so it actually, you are better doing traditional CBT when you see that. And good CBT therapists have been doing that from the beginning. That's why they were so mad at me when I said, reappraisal can become thought suppression. I said, no, of course, we don't mean that. I understand you don't mean that. But talk to your clients. Some of them do that. They hear the message of reappraisal and they turn it into, don't think this, don't think this. That's suppression. And so why come that close to the problem? Think about it more the way an ACT person would. Think about this as, how do we establish more cognitive flexibility? And it's right there in the ACT protocols, of writing your history. Now, take the facts and the reactions and rewrite it with all the facts and reactions still in there, but a different story. That's in the first ACT book. It's a reappraisal exercise. Of course it is. It just wasn't called that. So here's what happens, my friend. If you take all the mediators, all of them, and you start thinking of psychological flexibility more the way we do now with the EAM, the extended evolutionary meta model that's in process-based therapy, of healthy variation selected and retained, fitted to context across these dimensions and these levels of human life. I go through the list and I end up with 95% of everything we know could be called psychological flexibility. Now, here's the problem for the ACT people. It's kind of what happens when something becomes everything. When I'm talking about the sense of self, that is a witnessing, noticing sense of self, I sometimes will say something like, "You see this little card?" I say, "Yes." I say, "You see it because of the edges?" They say, "Yes." I said, "If this card were absolutely everywhere, what would happen to it?" And people kind of look. If there was no space, no place in the universe where this card wasn't, what would happen to it? And sometimes people will see it would disappear. We may be in a card like that right now. How would we know? And this sense of self, going back, I'm not going to say there, has that quality. That's why it's not thing-like. That's why it's called spiritual. That's why wisdom traditions call the sense of self everything, nothing, because they mean that without distinction. Well, if when things become everything, they also become nothing, we're very close. You see the problem, my friend. Psychological flexibility might be just everything. It might be a way of talking about the whole thing. Well, then what's ACT? If I tell you ACT is about deliberately producing psychological flexibilities, and it's right there on the CBS website. It's been there for 20 years. That's what ACT is. It's not a technique. Then what's not ACT? Well, it's a little scary, but I'm willing to keep walking in this direction, because I think what it might mean now is ACT will kind of become a way, and psychological flexibility, of talking about a process focus from a particular set of philosophical assumptions, a particular stance in therapy. Some of those qualities will still be there. Functional contextualism, aontology, all those kinds of pragmatism will still be there. And not everybody has those philosophical assumptions. But the exciting thing, now the scary thing is that if you're an ACT person, maybe ACT gets so big it just becomes like one with the sky. But the exciting thing is this journey we've been on to create an evidence-based intervention for the interests of human beings. Maybe when we take a process focus, instead of the 101 different disorders and syndromes and stuff, we can come into a place where there's a very small set that has many different forms and ways that it can be expressed, but functionally, a very small set that, viewed in a particular way, can basically eat almost everything. And we'll be left with a simpler task of how do these processes manifest themselves in the individual human life over time, so that we know how to target and change them. And whether you call it ACT or something else, maybe we don't have to worry about that. Maybe that's just ego and pride. What's more important is that people get what they need to be able to navigate the challenge of the human condition in a way that they can be who they are, and so that it is possible for love to not be everything but the only thing. That would be cool. That might be a game worth playing. So it's a scary but wonderful story that we've been in with psychological flexibility. And I would write a paper right now, basically saying psychological flexibility is the one ring that rules them all. But I don't quite yet know how to include sociocultural factors and biophysiological ones. We need to make sure that that concept includes diet, sleep, exercise, health, and it includes relationships that work and being kind to others, and not just because if you're healthy psychologically, you'll do this, but because no, we really need to focus on how to do this, which I've tried to do with things like pro-social, or that we try to do in extending psychological flexibility to the relationship and so forth. So that's the thing that holds me back right now from just saying psychological flexibility is a way of talking about the entire process-based model. I'll come pretty close though. I write a sentence almost like that in that rat study, knowing full well it may mean that ACT disappears.
Thank you. And concluding this interview, you are the author of several books and scientific articles, and you have been president of several scientific societies and received several awards, as the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies. And you are ranked as one of the most cited psychologists in the world. But how was for you at the beginning, Steve? And what would you suggest to someone who can look at you as a model to be inspired by?
Well, if you're asking what do I say to young people about how to do a professional life journey, I always say start with your heart, start with what really moves you, because you can trust that. The things you care about do matter. And if there's a point of suffering or something you really want to focus on, allow that to evolve and grow. Don't just hold it like a stone in a box. But, the wonderful thing that we get to do as psychologists, as behavioral scientists, as psychotherapists, and so forth, is that, we get to have as the central focus of our life human beings and their health and betterment. And what a joyful thing that is to be about, So heart first, and then head and hands, then learning these principles and getting clear on your philosophical assumptions and all those things you need to do cognitively, that then will inform what you can do technologically and with your hands, and bring your creativity to the challenges that you've created for yourself. I'm still playing the game. I think, that thing I was just saying earlier, of like a little kid saying, I'm going to get to that tree before you can tag me. I think that's what life is like. And that's true also in your life as a professional. If you take it seriously, it takes the fun out of it. If that child was told, if you don't touch the tree first, I'm going to beat you with a stick, it would no longer be a game. And the kid wouldn't want to play. They might be forced to play. And sometimes parents, say to the budding soccer player, things just like that. And they do take the fun out of it. Or people do it to themselves in the same way. But young people sometimes, because they're thinking of it in terms of the externals, the awards, the achievement, the grants, and that was part of my panic disorder. I mean, that being driven in that way was a part of why, thank God, my own psychology said this far, no farther. I'm not going to let you even teach a class with 3 people in it. How about that? And so I found a way forward that allowed me to go back to something that is closer to the way it really is. Yeah, it's important. The suffering I saw in my home is important. The pain I feel in my own heart is important. And we're just playing here. We're going to be on this earth for just an eye blink of time, and we will all be forgotten. But can we play it in a way that leaves something in the culture, that does something for those around us? Even that will eventually disappear. I mean, the physicists tell us either there's enough dark matter for us to all have come back to an infinitely dense P, from which it'll explode and do it again, or they're beginning to think, no, it just expands until it all goes dark. And neither of those futures sound meaningful to me. So we're not playing this game because it's important. We're playing it because we care. And that's as real as their next breath or taking their next step. So to the young people, I would say, what do you care about? And would it be okay if you allowed yourself to belong here and to play the game of caring about that in a way that might make a difference? Even if it never does, even if there's no awards, there's no grants, there's no great things, you can run as hard as your little feet will carry you towards touching that tree. That is a life worth living, of being who you are and contributing to the things that you care about. I will finish my career with 57 PhDs that I've graduated. And I have people there who don't like ACT, but graduated from my lab. I have people there who are practicing clinicians or practicing behavior analysts who never published anything. I have deans of major colleges and people who are major grant getters. I'm proud of every one of them. And I think all of those journeys are worthy. And so that's what I'd recommend to somebody asking how, would be to play hard, play big, play to win, but play inside a place in which you belong, and you don't have to earn your keep. This is just the loving things people do.
Thank you so much, Steve, for this interview and for your amazing work and for your heart.
Thank you for the opportunity, and to all those who are seeing it, and just for my friend Ema here, who has been on himself such a wonderful journey. We didn't talk about that, but in the back, I've tried to be supportive of the journey that you've been on. And so I hope something I've said for the people who are watching is useful to them in their journey. And, the kind of community that we're creating, in which people like you care about students is, part of how we create, I think, a world in which maybe we could create a psychology more worthy of the challenge of the human condition. That might be a fun game to play. So, peace, love, and life, my friend. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you again, my friend. It was a real pleasure talking with you. And thank you for watching this interview.